The stars twinkled eerily through the cracks in Earth's atmosphere as the final remnants of humanity's fleet floated in the void. A once proud armada, spanning entire star systems, was now reduced to scattered wreckage. Entire cities lay in ruins, their once bustling streets now ghostly and empty. Earth was broken, its infrastructure all but destroyed by a relentless alien invasion. But amid the devastation, humanity's last line of defense remained. The Sentinel Station, an ancient outpost in Earth's orbit, hidden and forgotten by time. Admiral Kira Holt stood in the command center, staring out the viewport as the station hummed with activity. The glowing panels reflected the fatigue in her eyes. Her uniform, worn from countless battles, seemed to weigh heavier with every passing day. The sounds of workers rushing through the corridors, the clinking of metal, and the low murmur of strategists on comms filled the space, but it all felt far too quiet, too calm. She knew that peace was a luxury they could no longer afford. "Admiral," said a voice behind her. It was Commander Ryan Pierce, her second in command. His eyes were sharp, but there was an undeniable weariness in his posture. "The Kara fleet is almost at the edge of the system. We've got less than 72 hours before they make their final assault." Holt turned to face him, her jaw set in a determined line. "We'll be ready." Ryan's eyes darted to the holographic display in front of them, showing Earth's shattered continents and the scattered remains of humanity's former strength. "Ready? With what exactly?" "Our ships are in pieces, and our resources are depleted. The fleet we have left can barely mount a defense." Holt's gaze flickered toward the engineering section, where workers were painstakingly reassembling the broken hulls of Earth's warships. Ships that had once been the pride of Earth's military, now reduced to little more than floating skeletons. "I know the situation," Holt said quietly, "but we still have something that Kara can't predict." She crossed the room, pulling up a new set of schematics on the console. "We have the old tech, the stuff they never thought we'd use again." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "The Arctic systems. Admiral, that tech's decades old. We can barely get the power cores to stay stable for a few minutes, let alone engage in combat." "I'm not suggesting we rely on them entirely," Holt replied. "But the Kara believe we're finished. That's their biggest mistake. Humanity never gives up. Ever." She pointed to a small, outdated cruiser on the schematic. "This ship was among the first prototypes we abandoned during the war. We've brought it back online. It's small, but if we reconfigure the armament systems and adapt the thrusters for a high-speed approach." Ryan was already shaking his head. "The suicide mission." "We have no choice," Holt said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "I'm not throwing them into the fire, but if we can disrupt their fleet, just enough to buy us time, we might have a shot." He watched her closely, sensing the weight of the decision in her words. She wasn't just preparing for battle. She was preparing for a fight humanity couldn't afford to lose. "Holt," Ryan said slowly, "you know we can't do this alone. We'll need every pilot we have left, and I can't promise they'll be ready for this kind of challenge." "We don't need perfect," Holt replied, her tone firm. "We need fighters. You know where to find them." The words hit Ryan like a punch to the gut. She was right. Earth's last pilots, many of them young and untrained, had been rushed into combat after the last major assault on their world. Most were inexperienced, but desperation had turned them into warriors. They were Earth's last hope. A soft chime echoed in the room, pulling Holt's focus back to the task at hand. On the console before her, a signal from a deep space relay flashed, a message buried deep within layers of encryption. As she opened it, a new, unsettling thought crossed her mind. Whoever had sent this message, whatever it was, they knew something she didn't. But the question of who and why would have to wait. There was no time. "Get the pilots in formation," Holt ordered, turning to Ryan. "Prepare the fleet, and let's make sure we're ready. This is it." Ryan nodded, knowing this was more than just a mission. It was humanity's last stand. The early hours of the next day were a blur of frantic activity as the remnants of Earth's fleet rushed to reassemble themselves. The Sentinel Station became a hive of activity. Pilots, engineers, and strategists scrambling to make sense of a situation that seemed insurmountable. The massive hangars that once housed Earth's most formidable warships were now barely able to accommodate the Galactic fleet that had been pieced together from ancient designs, salvaged tech, and hastily repaired vessels. Admiral Holt paced the command deck, her mind racing. A massive fleet of alien invaders was on the horizon. Yet here they were, fighting with scraps, relying on old systems that could barely hold up. Still, she knew something the Kara didn't. Humanity's resilience wasn't measured by its fleet strength, but by the ingenuity of those who would fly them. Admiral. Commander Pierce's voice interrupted her thoughts. He stood at the console, his expression grim. The new ships are operational. Barely. But they're ready. Holt gave a quick nod, masking the unease she felt. The new fleet, such as it was, consisted of a handful of re-engineered ships from the First War, smaller, less sophisticated than their former counterparts, but powerful in their own right. Earth's engineers had stripped away all the unnecessary frills, turning them into weapons of pure efficiency. There was no time for luxury or decoration. These ships were built for survival, and their crews would have to fly them into the heart of battle with everything they had. "Do we have any idea of where the Kara fleet is?" Holt asked, trying to keep her focus sharp. Pierce hesitated for a moment. "They're about to enter the system, Admiral. We've detected their lead ships. There are at least 30 cruisers, plus scouts and destroyers. Their main flagship, a dreadnought, is still on its way." "Then we don't have much time," Holt muttered, turning to the tactical screen. As the fleet moved into position, Holt took a deep breath. She could feel the weight of every decision now. Every life that would be lost in this battle. She carried it. The new recruits, barely trained, were their only hope. Yet Holt knew one thing. They wouldn't back down. They were human, and that was their greatest strength. At the far side of the hangar, the first squadron of ships prepared to launch. A motley crew of pilots, most barely out of their teens, were strapping into their seats, their nerves palpable. These weren't seasoned warriors. They were civilians, farmers, teachers, engineers who had answered the call to fight. Some had never flown before. Others had only known the horrors of war in their nightmares. But now, they were humanity's first line of defense. Lieutenant Jace Carver, once a rookie pilot who had seen his entire squadron wiped out in the last invasion, stood at the head of his new group. His face was a mix of exhaustion and steely resolve. His new squadron, callsign Silver Talon, would be leading the charge. He activated his comms and looked across the row of faces, trying to mask his own fear. "Listen up," he said, voice steady. "We don't know how this is going to go. But what we do know is this. The Kara think they can walk all over us. They think we're done. But they're wrong. We're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting for everything." The other pilots exchanged uneasy glances. Carver could see their doubt, their uncertainty, but there was something else in their eyes. The same fire he had seen in his own after the first invasion. Defiance. He smiled, despite the pit in his stomach. "We do this together. We fight, we hit hard, and we show them what happens when they underestimate humanity." The countdown began. Carver and his squadron launched, breaking through the hangar doors with a roar that reverberated through the station. The small, untested fleet cut through the void like a comet of rebellion, streaking toward the incoming alien Armada. The Kara, who had been so sure of their dominance, had no idea what was coming. As the enemy ships loomed closer, Carver's heart raced. His squadron was no match for the Kara's might, but they weren't there to fight for glory. They were there to buy Earth's last hope time to prepare. In the distance, the Kara warships slowly encroached on Earth's defenses, their massive forms hanging like shadows against the black expanse of space. Carver gritted his teeth, activating his ship's weapons systems. "Silver Talon, engage," he barked into his comms. The first volley of energy blasts erupted from the newly forged Earth fleet. The ensuing explosion of light lit up the darkened sky. Carver's hands tightened on the controls, guiding his ship in a sharp dive to avoid enemy fire. As they broke through the outer defenses of the Kara fleet, the first battle between Earth's Galactic fleet and the overwhelming alien armada began. The odds were impossible. But humanity, for all its fragility, would not go down without a fight. The battle was chaos incarnate. The Silver Talon squadron darted through the debris of shattered Kara ships, their outdated vessels somehow dodging the waves of laser fire and plasma missiles that blazed toward them. Lieutenant Carver's heart pounded in his chest, each breath coming in shallow gasps as he weaved his ship through the oncoming onslaught. It was the kind of combat he had only ever seen in simulations, except this time, the stakes were real. "Focus on the destroyers," Carver shouted over comms, his voice tight with the effort of keeping control. "Take out their engines and cripple their maneuverability." Around him, his squadron obeyed. The fleet of newly forged ships may have been a motley collection of salvaged tech and makeshift reinforcements, but they fought with a relentless tenacity that was all too human. Earth's pilots, though inexperienced, had one weapon the Kara could never replicate: the unpredictability of their tactics. A Kara destroyer exploded in a brilliant flash as Carver's wingman, Lieutenant Ellis, struck its engines with a well-placed shot. The alien ship's once imposing frame was now a smoldering wreck, spinning aimlessly into the void. Carver's pulse quickened. That was the first victory, but it wouldn't be the last. He knew there were still hundreds of ships to take down. Enemy reinforcements incoming. Commander Pierce's voice crackled over their comms. "A Dreadnought-class vessel is heading straight for the station. It's massive. Massive enough to wipe us off the map in one strike." Holt's voice cut through the tension. "Lieutenant Carver, take your squadron and intercept it. If that dreadnought reaches the station, this is over." Carver's stomach tightened. A dreadnought. The Kara flagship. Its size was almost incomprehensible, its firepower legendary. They had no chance against such a behemoth without more firepower. "Understood, Admiral. Silver Talon, we've got a new target. We're going after the dreadnought," Carver ordered, his voice steady, though the weight of the mission was crushing. His squadron changed formation, rallying behind him as they shifted their course toward the enormous Kara warship. It loomed in the distance like a floating fortress, its guns already firing on Earth's remaining stations. As they drew closer, the dreadnought's scale became even more intimidating. Its long, jagged hull seemed to pulse with an ominous energy. "Lock on to their weak points," Carver directed, scanning the dreadnought's hull for any vulnerabilities. A handful of its weapons systems were exposed at certain joints in the ship's construction. If they could target those, they might have a shot. The first wave of Kara counterattacks came in the form of smaller fighter crafts, masses of sleek, deadly vessels swarming toward the Silver Talon squadron. Carver barked an order, and his squadron scattered, expertly dodging enemy fire as they opened up on the incoming fighters. The night sky was lit with the deadly dance of laser beams and missile trails, and every second felt like an eternity. A missile streaked past Carver's wing, grazing the side of his ship and sending a tremor through the hull. He cursed under his breath, his hands working feverishly to stabilize the ship. The cockpit rattled, alarms blaring as systems began to overload. "Ellis, you're up," Carver shouted, pulling his ship out of the danger zone and falling into position behind the dreadnought. "Go for their aft engines. Now." Ellis's ship dove into the target zone, her fighter firing everything it had at the dreadnought's vulnerable rear. Explosions erupted as the missile barrage hit its mark, but it wasn't enough. The dreadnought's engines flickered, but they didn't go down. Not yet. Damn it. Carver swore, watching as the massive warship continued its relentless march toward the station. "Pull back," Carver ordered. "We can't break through. We need more firepower to take that thing down." The silence on the comms was deafening. In that moment, Carver understood that their gamble had failed. The old ships, the inexperienced pilots, they weren't enough. The dreadnought had barely been scratched, and the rest of the Kara fleet was closing in fast. But then a voice, steady and full of resolve, broke through the tension. It was Admiral Holt. "We've got a Plan B. Prepare for reinforcements. It's time for humanity to show the Kara what happens when you push us too far." Carver didn't have to ask what she meant. He knew. The rest of Earth's fleet had been preparing an ancient weapon, one that, if unleashed properly, could make a difference. Holt had promised him they had a secret weapon hidden beneath the ruins of the old Earth fleet, and now it was time to find out if it could live up to the legend. The Silver Talon squadron, battered and bruised, pulled back into formation, retreating momentarily as Holt's command rang out across the station. "We're not done yet, Lieutenant. We're just getting started." The Silver Talon squadron limped back toward the safety of the Sentinel station, their ships trailing smoke and sparking from the damage sustained in the assault on the Kara dreadnought. Lieutenant Carver's hands gripped the controls, his knuckles white, as he fought to keep his ship steady. The alarms that had been blaring nonstop were finally quieting, but the silence in the cockpit was deafening. The dreadnought was still intact, still pushing forward, and every second felt like an eternity. Behind him, the other pilots were no better off. Ellis's ship had a massive gash across its flank, barely hanging together. Lieutenant Monroe had lost half his wing, his ship barely holding position. The rest of the squadron was battered, beaten, but they were still alive. And that, at least, was something. "All units, fall back to the station," Carver ordered, his voice strained. "We've got seconds before they hit us with everything they've got. It's not over yet." The station loomed ahead, a jagged silhouette against the stars. Its once pristine exterior was scarred from previous skirmishes, and now it was humanity's last hope. Behind the protective hull of the station, Earth's surviving forces gathered, but their morale was fragile. They had no more answers, no more miracles to rely on, only the fading hope that somehow, against all odds, they could find a way to stop the Kara. "Lieutenant Carver," Commander Pierce's voice crackled over the comms, his tone urgent. "We've got a problem. The Kara fleet isn't just coming after us. They are also moving to blockade Earth. They've got a full perimeter set up, and if we don't act fast, they'll cut us off from any outside reinforcements. We're looking at a siege, Lieutenant. It's going to be all or nothing." Carver's heart sank. The Kara were ruthless, efficient. A blockade meant nothing would get in or out without their permission. No reinforcements, no supplies. They'd be trapped on Earth, facing a slow, agonizing death as the Kara took their time wiping them out. The situation was even worse than he'd feared. "We don't have the firepower to take on the entire fleet," Carver muttered, slamming a fist against his console in frustration. "What's our plan, then?" Before Pierce could respond, Admiral Holt's voice broke through the static, calm yet heavy with determination. "We're activating the secondary initiative, Lieutenant. We got one shot to stop them." Carver's stomach churned. The secondary initiative. He had heard rumors about a secret weapon, but they were just that. Rumors. The ancient tech Holt had mentioned during their last meeting now felt like a distant memory, something to cling to in the face of insurmountable odds. "Prepare your squadron," Holt continued. "We'll need you to buy us time to deploy it." "But, Admiral..." "That's an order, Carver." Holt cut him off, her voice unwavering. "You're not alone in this. Everyone on this station is fighting to keep humanity alive. Now get to it." Carver didn't hesitate. He knew what he had to do, even if it seemed like a fool's errand. He looked at his squadron, their ships barely holding together, and nodded. This was it. The endgame. "Silver Talon, you heard the Admiral. We're buying humanity its last shot," he said, his voice loud and clear. "Get ready to move out. We're going to hold the line." The pilots responded with terse affirmatives. They didn't have time for speeches or grand declarations. The clock was ticking, and the Kara fleet was moving in fast. Carver's ship rumbled as he pushed it into a sharp turn, heading back toward the battle. The dreadnought was still out there, but so were hundreds of smaller ships. The Kara fleet had yet to unleash its full fury. They were waiting for the final blow, waiting for Earth to make a mistake. And that's exactly what Carver and his squadron were about to give them. Target the smaller Kara vessels first. We'll use hit-and-run tactics to disrupt their formation. We don't take down the dreadnought yet. We keep them distracted, Carver ordered, plotting a course toward the lead Kara cruisers. The fleet wasn't just outnumbered. They were underprepared. But there was one thing Earth still had that the Kara didn't: the element of surprise. Understood, Ellis responded. I'll take the left flank. Let's make them regret ever coming to Earth. The squadron split into smaller formations, weaving through the vast void of space, intent on carrying out their mission. The tension in Carver's chest was unbearable, but there was no time to second-guess. Not now. Not when the Kara were closing in, and humanity's fate hung by a thread. As they neared the heart of the Kara fleet, the size and power of the alien ships became even more apparent. The dreadnought loomed like a monstrous shadow in the distance, its massive guns glowing with the energy that could level an entire planet. But the Earth fleet wasn't giving up yet. Not while they still had breath. The Silver Talon squadron weaved through the deadly swarms of Kara fighters, their ships flickering and shuddering with every near miss. Carver's hands were steady on the controls, his eyes scanning the chaos before him. The battle had escalated into an inferno of flashing lights, twisting ships, and the deafening roar of weapons fire. The Kara fleet, vast and merciless, was pushing forward, determined to crush Earth's last defenders. Form up, Silver Talon, Carver called over the comms. We can't keep dodging forever. Target the cruisers, hit their engines, and make it count. We need to keep their formation disjointed long enough for Polt's plan to work. His squadron acknowledged, and they broke formation into a scattered pattern, each ship darting into the heart of the Kara fleet. The Kara ships, sleek and deadly, darted toward them, their weapons lighting up with devastating force. The space around them was a sea of fire and destruction, a violent clash of steel and plasma. Lieutenant Monroe was the first to engage. His ship cut through a swarm of Kara fighters with terrifying precision, launching a series of missiles that tore through one of the alien destroyers, sending it into a violent spin. Explosions ripped through the Kara lines, but the enemy was relentless. A pulse of energy from a nearby Kara cruiser tore through the side of Monroe's ship, and his cockpit lit up with flashing red warnings. "Monroe!" Carver shouted, twisting his ship to dodge an incoming blast. "Get out of there, now." The comms crackled, but there was only silence on the other end. Carver's stomach dropped as he saw Monroe's ship spiral uncontrollably into the blackness of space, a trail of fire marking its descent into oblivion. The harsh reality of war slammed into him like a physical blow. He had lost another one. But there was no time to grieve. He had a mission. "Silver Talon, stay focused," Carver barked. "Keep pushing. We can't give up now." A wave of Kara fighters swooped down on them, their weapons primed and ready to annihilate. Carver's heart raced, but his instincts kicked in. He banked hard to the right, avoiding a barrage of plasma bolts that streaked past him. His squadron followed suit, weaving in and out of the Kara formation, making quick work of the smaller ships with deadly precision. "We're through the first line," Ellis reported, her voice sharp. "But they've got reinforcements coming from the rear. We won't be able to hold them off forever." Carver's mind raced. They had barely made a dent in the Kara's numbers, and yet the true danger still loomed. The dreadnought. It was still out there, its weapons capable of leveling entire cities, and it was barreling toward the Sentinel station. They couldn't let it reach Earth's last line of defense. "Carver, look," Ellis shouted. Carver snapped his head toward the left, his eyes widening as the dreadnought came into view. It was enormous, a towering mass of alien steel, its surface covered in jagged alien symbols. The flagship's weapons glowed ominously, preparing to fire on the station. A sea of Kara fighters swarmed around it like a protective cloud, but at its core, the dreadnought was the true threat. He gritted his teeth and slammed his fist onto the comms panel. All units were going after the dreadnought. Focus fire on their turrets and propulsion. We have to cripple it before it can fire. Roger that, Carver, Ellis replied. This is it. With a fierce battle cry, the squadron changed course, heading directly for the heart of the Kara fleet. As they neared the dreadnought, Carver could see the massive warship's surface shimmer with energy, its weapons charging for the killing blow. The entire Silver Talon squadron dove toward it, their ships dodging, weaving, firing with everything they had. But then, something unexpected happened. A surge of energy rippled from the Sentinel station. The once muted hum of the station's defensive systems now roared to life. In the heart of the station's ruins, a massive cannon, hidden beneath layers of debris and forgotten technology, suddenly came online. It was an ancient relic, something thought lost in the early days of Earth's downfall. But now it hummed with power, and the target locked onto the Kara dreadnought. A blinding beam of energy shot out from the station, a long pulse of blue light that tore through space, slamming into the dreadnought's shields with an earth-shattering impact. The alien vessel shuddered, its shields flickering under the strain. For a moment, it seemed like the dreadnought might collapse. Then, the alien ship's weapons fired. The blast from the dreadnought's main cannon slammed into the station's shields with the force of a collapsing star. The station groaned, its hull cracking under the pressure, but the shield held for now. Get clear, Holt's voice came through the comms. We've only got one shot before the weapon cools down. Push them back, Carver. Silver Talon, form up, Carver shouted. We've got one chance to bring that dreadnought down. Let's make it count. They accelerated toward the Kara flagship, weapons blazing, the full force of humanity's last stand concentrated in their attack. The squadron, battered and bruised, would either break the Kara's iron grip or be crushed beneath it. And with Earth's fate hanging by a thread, they would give everything they had. The Silver Talon squadron dove toward the Kara dreadnought, their ships vibrating with the sheer force of their velocity. Carver's mind was focused, narrowed down to the present moment. The next few seconds could decide everything. His fingers danced over the controls, weaving his ship through the endless swarm of Kara fighters and cruisers that surrounded the dreadnought like a wall of death. Behind him, Ellis and the others followed, their ships firing at anything that moved. Missiles streaked past, slamming into the Kara ships and sending them spiraling into space. For a brief moment, Carver felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could do this. But then the Kara flagship fired. The beam from the dreadnought's main cannon cut through space like a cosmic sword, slicing through the heart of Silver Talon's formation. The energy blast whizzed past Carver's ship, narrowly missing him by mere inches. He felt the shockwave as it passed, rattling his ship and throwing his controls into chaos. The immense power of the weapon was almost overwhelming, and Carver had to fight to regain control, the ship's systems flickering under the strain. Carver, pull back. Ellis shouted through the comms, her voice urgent. We can't take that kind of fire. We need to regroup. Carver's mind raced. He could feel the weight of their failure looming. They couldn't break through the Kara defense line, not with the dreadnought's firepower raining down on them. But then, something caught his eye. A gap, a tiny crack in the enemy's formation, a weak point in the dreadnought's defense. It wasn't much, but it was something. If they could exploit it, they might stand a chance. Carver's gut twisted, but his instincts told him that this was their only opportunity. No, Carver replied, his voice sharp with determination. We're not retreating. We're going in. Follow me. He slammed his fighter forward, rocketing toward the breach in the enemy's lines, his heart pounding. The squadron hesitated for a moment before falling in behind him, their trust in their commander unwavering. The Kara fighters were closing in, their energy blasts flashing like deadly streaks of light. Carver swerved, narrowly avoiding a direct hit, but his ship's shields flared under the assault. His console beeped furiously, warning him that the shields were almost gone. "Ellis, now's your chance," Carver shouted. Ellis's ship darted in front of him, unleashing a barrage of missiles that tore through the Kara fighters and cruisers. The path ahead was clear for a moment, and Carver pushed his ship forward, closing in on the dreadnought. The massive alien ship loomed before him, its dark hull a twisted monument to the Kara's technological might. Its weapons were still charging, but it was vulnerable now. Its defensive systems stretched thin from the continuous barrage from the Sentinel station's hidden cannon. Carver locked onto the dreadnought's aft engines, the ship's only weakness. He could see the weak points, faint but unmistakable, in the ship's exterior, an opening where the Kara's shields weren't fully active. If he could just get close enough, just land a precise hit. "Target locked," Carver muttered under his breath, as his finger hovered over the trigger. "Come on." The dreadnought's turrets fired again, and this time, the blast hit closer, too close. The ship shook violently, and Carver's heart skipped a beat as alarms blared. His shields were gone, and he had to act now or never. "Carver," Ellis cried out, her voice full of fear. "Get out of there. You're too close." But Carver didn't pull back. He couldn't, not when Earth's survival was on the line. With a roar of defiance, Carver fired. His missiles screamed forward, tearing through the darkness. Time slowed as the missiles hurtled toward the dreadnought, carving their way through the Kara defenses. Carver's heart stopped as the first missile slammed into the dreadnought's aft engine. The explosion was like a burst of light, but it didn't stop there. The second missile struck, then the third, and suddenly, the dreadnought shuddered violently, its shields flickering as it lurched sideways in space. The enormous ship was reeling. "We did it," Carver whispered, disbelief creeping into his voice. "We actually did it." But their victory was short-lived. "Carver, we've got incoming," Ellis warned, her voice tight with urgency. Carver glanced up and saw what she meant. A new wave of Kara reinforcements was emerging from the far side of the battlefield. Dozens of new ships, heavier and more dangerous, poured into the fray. The Kara weren't giving up. They were bringing everything to bear. "We're not done yet," Carver said, his voice steely with resolve. "Silver Talon, form up. Keep fighting." The squadron regrouped, rallying around Carver. The dreadnought might have been wounded, but the Kara weren't backing down, and Earth's last defenders wouldn't either. It was the final push. The reckoning was upon them. The Kara reinforcements surged forward like a tidal wave, their sleek ships cutting through the chaos with terrifying precision. Carver's heart raced as he watched them close in from every direction. The dreadnought had been wounded, but the fight was far from over. Earth's forces were strained to their breaking point, but there was no choice now. Either they held the line or humanity would be extinguished. "Silver Talon, spread out." Carver barked into the comms. "We hit them from all sides. No mercy." The squadron responded with a chorus of affirmatives. They split, each pilot veering off to engage the oncoming Kara vessels. Carver's ship shook as another barrage of plasma fire raked across his hull. His shields flared bright, sparking with energy, and the warning lights began to flash. His ship was a mess of smoke and damage, but it was still flying. "Carver, your ship's barely holding together." Ellis's voice crackled through the comms. "Pull back and get to the station. We need to regroup." But Carver wasn't listening. He had seen enough of retreat. It wasn't an option anymore. "No," he growled. "We fight. We finish this." He gritted his teeth, pulling his ship into a violent turn to avoid an incoming blast. He pushed forward, charging directly into the heart of the Kara's new formation. Behind him, Ellis and the others followed, their fighters weaving in and out of the enemy ranks with calculated precision. The Kara's numbers were overwhelming, but humanity had one advantage now: desperation. They had nothing left to lose. As Carver pushed forward, the first wave of Kara ships began to fall. His missiles found their marks, tearing through shields and hulls. Ellis took out a cruiser, sending it into a spiral of flames, while Lieutenant Pierce laid waste to a pair of Kara fighters with his laser cannons. "We're cutting through them, but they're relentless," Ellis reported, her voice tense. "They're sending in reinforcements faster than we can destroy them." "Keep pushing," Carver snapped. "We've got one last shot at this, and we're not letting it slip away." A sudden, high-pitched screech filled his ears as a Kara fighter locked onto him. Before he could react, the alien ship fired a series of plasma bolts, one of which slammed into his ship's right wing. The impact sent him careening out of control, his cockpit flashing red with warning signals. The force of the blast sent a shockwave through his body, and for a moment, his vision blurred. "Carver, get control of your ship," Ellis shouted, panic creeping into her voice. Carver's fingers flew over the controls, desperately trying to stabilize his ship. His heart thudded in his chest as the world outside the cockpit spun, but slowly, inch by inch, he regained control. The fighter leveled out, but his hull was compromised, and the heat readings in the cockpit were reaching critical levels. "This is it," he muttered to himself, gritting his teeth. "We finish this, no matter what." He spun the ship around, diving straight into the swarm of Kara ships. There was no hesitation. He could feel the weight of his squadron behind him, their eyes locked onto the same target, the Kara dreadnought. "Ellis, I need you to cover me," Carver called, his voice steady despite the chaos. "I'm going in for the final strike." "Roger that," Ellis responded, her voice resolute. "We'll hold them off." The final assault on the dreadnought was underway. Carver saw the weak spot, the exposed energy conduits beneath the dreadnought's belly. The Kara had been focused on defending the bridge and the aft engines, but now they'd left an opening. He aimed his ship toward the weak point, weaving between Kara ships, avoiding incoming fire by the skin of his teeth. His ship shuddered as another blast tore into his hull. The pain was sharp, but he pushed forward, determined to see this through. "Carver, no," Ellis cried. "You're too close. Get out of there." But Carver didn't pull back. He could see the target clearly now. He fired everything he had. Missiles, laser fire, everything. The weapons screamed toward the dreadnought, hitting the exposed energy conduits with pinpoint precision. The alien ship roared in response, its shields flashing and flickering, then collapsing entirely. "Hit confirmed," Carver shouted, a sense of fierce triumph surging through him. "It's going critical." The dreadnought shook violently, its hull cracking as a chain reaction of explosions erupted across its surface. The immense ship's core was destabilizing. The Kara flagship was dying. But the danger wasn't over yet. "We've got seconds," Carver barked. "Get out of the blast zone." He pulled his ship into a hard turn, pushing the damaged craft to its limits. Ellis, Pierce, and the others followed, desperately weaving through the debris field left in the wake of their final assault. The explosion from the dreadnought's reactor was imminent, and the shockwave would tear through everything in its path. The squadron cleared the blast radius just as the dreadnought erupted in a cataclysmic explosion. The shockwave rippled through space, sending debris and fire in every direction. Carver's ship rocked, the force of the blast sending him into a wild spin. He gritted his teeth and fought to keep control, his eyes fixed on the distant form of the Sentinel station. The battle was over. The dreadnought had fallen, but the war, that was still to be decided. The blast from the Kara dreadnought rippled through space like the aftermath of a supernova, sending waves of shock and destruction in all directions. Carver's ship was tossed violently, the hull groaning in protest as the shockwave struck. His hands clenched the controls, fighting to regain control of his craft, and the fire-scorched dashboard flared with alerts. He had made it out, just, but not without a cost. His ship was a wreck, the engine sputtering, the thrusters struggling to maintain their course. "Carver, report." Ellis's voice crackled over the comms, faint but clear. "I'm alive," Carver responded, his voice tight. "Barely. Shields are gone. Engines are almost fried, but I'm still flying. I'm heading toward the station." Ellis sighed in relief. "Good. Just stay with us, all right? We can't afford to lose you now." Behind him, the rest of the squadron was pulling through, their ships battered but intact. The dreadnought had been reduced to a twisted, burning wreck, its once menacing silhouette now a distant memory in the dark void of space. But even with their most formidable enemy defeated, Carver knew they hadn't won yet. The Kara were relentless, and there was still the question of what came next. As he limped his way toward the Sentinel station, Carver's eyes scanned the field of wreckage. Kara ships, human fighters, debris from the fallen dreadnought. Everything was scattered in a chaotic, fiery graveyard. It was a scene that mirrored the battlefield on Earth itself. War had come to their doorstep, and the cost of survival was steep. "We're not out of the woods yet," Carver muttered to himself. He pushed his ship forward, aiming for the battered remains of the Sentinel station. The once imposing structure was now a fragmented shell of its former self, the ancient defenses barely functional after the brutal barrage. But it was still operational, and that was all that mattered. For now, anyway. Ellis was the first to break through the station's defensive perimeter, followed by the rest of the squadron. Their ships, limping and smoking, docked with the station one by one. Carver's fighter was the last to arrive, and he gently eased it into the hangar, the ship's systems flickering as it powered down. The hangar doors slowly closed behind him with a grinding thud, sealing them inside. The weight of silence settled over the squadron as they disembarked, their faces grim but relieved. "Report to command," Carver said, his voice hoarse. "We've won the battle, but we need to assess the situation. Earth's not safe yet." The pilots nodded, exchanging glances as they followed Carver out of the hangar bay. They walked through the wrecked hallways of the station, past damaged consoles and flickering lights. It felt like walking through the ruins of an old world, a world they had fought to protect. When they reached the command center, Holt was waiting for them, his face as hard and unyielding as ever. But even his stern demeanor couldn't hide the exhaustion in his eyes. "You did it," Holt said quietly. "The dreadnought is gone. But this war is far from over." Carver nodded. "We know, but we've bought ourselves some time. Time to regroup, to build up our defenses." Holt sighed and looked out over the shattered remains of Earth's final defense. "Time, yes, but we need more than that. The Kara are relentless. They've seen what we're capable of, and they'll come back harder. We're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting for our future." Carver took a deep breath, his gaze hardening with resolve. "We'll be ready." But the truth was, Carver wasn't sure if they could ever be ready for what was coming next. Earth had fought back with everything it had, but the Kara were an unstoppable force, and their victory over the dreadnought had only bought them a momentary respite. It was the calm before the storm. The squadron gathered together, battered and bloodied, but standing tall. They had no illusions. The war wasn't over, and the next battle would be even more dangerous. But they had something now, something that had been missing for so long. Hope. "We've won today," Carver said, turning to face his team. "But the war's not over, not by a long shot. Let's get ready for whatever comes next." And as they stood together in the command center, Earth's last line of defense ready for the next battle, Carver couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, humanity had one more fight in them. A fight that would echo through the stars and prove that Earth wasn't just a place to be conquered, it was a place worth saving.